The question of whether a party has breached a contract and is liable for damages is separate from the question of what amount of damages that party ought to pay. The second restatement sets out the three basic measures of damages in section 347: expectation, reliance, and restitution. In this module, we will discuss expectation damages, and in the next two modules, we will discuss reliance and restitution. Expectation damages are the gold standard for measuring contract damages. The goal of expectation damages is to put the party in the position it would have been if the contract had been fully performed. That is, to give the non-breaching party the benefit of their bargain. This measure of damages protects a party's expectation interest. Section 347 of the second restatement sets out the fairly basic formula for computing expectation damages, which contains four elements: the loss in value caused by the breach plus other losses, minus cost avoided, and loss avoided by the non-breaching parties not having to complete its performance of the rest of the contract after breach. Determining loss in value is a very fact-specific undertaking. The restatement does not set out a specific formula for computing loss in value. Section 348 of the restatement does set out what it calls two alternatives to loss in value, but this is a little misleading because these are really specialized examples of loss in value. For instance, where the breach has caused a delay in the use of property, the loss in value to the property's owner can be determined by the rental value of the property. Similarly, where the breach consists of defective or unfinished construction, loss in value to the owner of the building under construction can be determined by either the diminution in value or the cost of completing performance, although most courts say that the cost of completing performance is the preferred measure. However, we do have the Jacob and Youngs v. Kent case, where Cardozo says the loss to the homeowner caused by the contractor's failure to use reading pipe can be determined either by the diminution in market value of the home without reading pipe, which was nothing, as the difference between the two types of pipe caused no diminution in the market value of the home, or by the cost of tearing out the wrong pipe and installing reading pipe, which would have been extremely expensive. The court chooses diminution in value as the appropriate measure of damages. There are other ways of articulating the expectation measure of damages, and some think these alternative ways of articulating expectation damages make more intuitive sense than the restatement formula. Where a seller has breached by refusing to convey something purchased by the other party, such as goods, the measure of damages set out in UCC section 2-713 is sometimes expressed as the difference between the contract price and the market price at the time of the breach, plus other loss, but minus expenses saved. So if the contract price for a widget is $100,000, but the market price at the time the breaching seller is to deliver the widget is $110,000, the disappointed buyer will be awarded $10,000. This is because in order to purchase another widget on the market, the buyer will have to spend $110,000. The buyer may also have incidental or consequential damages. For example, if the breaching seller was located near to the buyer, and the buyer originally intended to pick up the widget himself, but as a result of the breach, he has to have the substitute widget shipped from out of state, the buyer will also be able to recover the additional shipping costs. Even if the buyer decides not to purchase a substitute widget, we would still want to award the disappointed buyer the benefit of his bargain. If the seller had performed the contract, the buyer would have spent $100,000, but he would have received a widget worth $110,000. Given the breach, the buyer doesn't have to spend the $100,000. Nonetheless, he should receive the profit he would have made, or $10,000. To point out the obvious, if the contract price is higher than the market price at the time the seller is to perform, the disappointed buyer will have suffered no damages, or at best, nominal damages. So if the contract price was $110,000, but the market price was only $100,000, the seller's breach actually saved the buyer from losing $10,000 on the transaction. The buyer has no reason to go to court. He should send the seller a thank you note instead. Conversely, when the seller is the injured party, if the contract price is $110,000 and the market price has dropped to $100,000 between the time of contracting and the time for performance, we would award the seller the difference, or $10,000. This is because the seller's profit came from wisely entering into a contract at a price that is above the market price at the time the seller has to deliver the goods. The seller sold the widget to the breaching buyer for $110,000, thereby making a profit of $10,000 over the market price. Presumably, if the seller tries to resell the widget, he would only get the market price of $100,000. To give the seller the benefit of his bargain, we have to award him the extra $10,000. This method of computing expectation damages can also be used with real estate. The Ray v. Uris Brothers case in the casebook gives an example of this. In that case, the Rays hired Uris Brothers to build them a house for $16,300. Uris Brothers was held to have breached the contract. To put the Rays in the position they would have been in had the defendant performed the contract, the Rays need to have spent $16,300 for the house. In fact, it cost the Rays $22,293.40 to have a different company build the house. Thus, the court awarded them the difference between the contract price and what they actually spent, or $5,993.40. In construction contracts where the builder is the damaged party, the expectation measure of damages is often expressed as the builder's net profit plus the builder's unreimbursed costs at the time of the breach. So if the builder was to be paid $150,000 to build a home and his total costs were going to be $130,000, he stood to net a profit of $20,000. Suppose the owner wrongfully terminates the contract at a time when the builder has already incurred $90,000 in costs, and the owner has made installment payments of $75,000. Under this formula, the builder should recover his net profit, $20,000, plus his unreimbursed costs, or $35,000. It's a good idea to double-check your understanding of expectation damages by using more than one formula if possible. The results should be identical no matter which formula you use. So, to use the restatement formula in the above hypothetical, you would perform the following computation. The damages are the sum of the loss in value, which would be the total contract price, $150,000, minus what the owner has already paid, which was $75,000, for a net loss in value of $75,000, plus other loss, there were no other consequential damages in this hypo, minus the cost avoided, which would be the total costs of $130,000, minus costs already incurred, which were $90,000, or a total of $40,000 in costs avoided. That is, costs that the builder will not have to incur due to the owner's breach. Minus loss avoided, which would be zero as this was a profitable contract for the builder. Using the restatement formula, the builder should recover the sum of $75,000 minus $40,000, or $35,000 in damages. Expectation damages will provide the non-breaching party with compensation for the lost profits he would have earned if the contract had been performed. But there are instances where the non-breaching party either cannot prove what the lost profits would have been to the required degree of certainty, or would not have in fact earned any profits. That is, at the end of the contract, the non-breaching party would have either broke even or lost money. The next two modules, on the reliance measure of damages and the restitution measure of damages, discuss alternative ways of measuring damages when expectation damages are not available.